Hi, can you guys hear me? This is Mr. Dang, and I'm starting a webcast today about this app that I made that has kind of the newest things that I've created. Um, so let me start by sharing just the overall idea of the app. But let's see who's on the line right now. We've got uh, we've got Anton. Anton, if you don't know, he has a user group in Washington D.C. and um, they just had their user group meeting recently. We've got Victor, and let's see, we've got uh, Raymond, Gilbert. Hello. Um, all right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and I'll walk through just what is this app for, and why did I make it. Let me switch to Let's switch to screen sharing, present to everybody, and let's jump over to PowerApps. So I've got my Power App pulled up. It's called Formative. Formative means, formative in this case refers to formative assessment. It's a fancy way, it's not just a fancy way of saying quiz, it means a little bit more than that. A formative assessment is a way of checking where is a student. This app is pretty much Forms. It's Microsoft Forms, it's Google Forms, but with some of the features that I've always wanted from Microsoft Forms and Google Forms. I'll start from the Create screen. I can create an assessment. When I get to the Create screen, I'm actually saving a record right away. I'm creating a record, and then anything that I change, it just updates that record. This is my way of auto-saving any of the changes. So let's say this is a survey where I want to know, what you think about this video? So let's call it uh, Mr. Dang Open House Survey. So I might want to know, what'd you think of my open house? Over here on the side, you'll see I put in some of the styling that I wanted, some gradients, some drop shadow, and this will take me to the next screen. Notice I kept things very simple. I wanted to create an experience in the app where I just show what's relevant at any given time. And if you want to see more, or you want to change more, you can go ahead and do that. Other things of note here, this is just a simple people picker. So I can type in the names of anybody in my tenant and have them searched. Here's an interesting feature that I wanted to show you. For tags, notice when I click into this combo box, there's no options. There's not even any options when I attempt to search. Let me show you how this works. Suppose I wanted to give some metadata for this open house survey, and I wanted to say this is related to open house. I might put that as one of my tags. Let's say it's also a survey, not a quiz. It's just very open-ended. And let's say it's related to, and you'll see right there that the tags become items. They become part of this combo box. So that's a neat feature that I'll be showing today. And then the rest is just some normal work. Oh, let me put the name of the survey again. Mr. Dang's Open House Survey. We go to the next screen. I'm in the formative assessment, or in this case, we're making a survey experience. I can add question types from text, choice, or custom. If I select text, this is just a basic text question. So somebody who's filling this out would respond either in a short answer, in a paragraph response, and I made it possible for them to ink a response. Notice I'm not showing the entire inking control. This is just a representation of the kind of question this is. If I were to add a choice question, let me see if this works. All right, so if I, oh, yep, it looks like some of this changed recently. Um, but we'll go ahead and just walk through what we can. Let me open this up again. And locate it. So some of the things that I'm doing inside this app uh, are kind of otherworldly, is the best way I can describe it. Sorry for the hiccup. All right, let's come back to create. We'll put in that information very quickly. Mr. Dang's in-house survey. Okay. I will just put in a simple question. And let's see. What did you think of this webinar or this live stream? Notice as soon as I click out of this field, you didn't see the little dots scrolling on the screen. It saved very quickly. This is actually stored on Microsoft Excel. Okay, so this is the form creating experience. Now I could continue and go down the line. Let me show you. If I go back, that back arrow knows contextually what screen I came from. So I can click back and it'll just walk through the entire sequence. Let's go through the edit experience. I have all of the, oh yeah, it looks like I started two Microsoft or Mr. Dang open house surveys. If I click edit, it'll pop up, it'll retrieve the questions that I wanted. If let me see, if I pull up this one, here's some older ones. I could play one of the surveys that has been created. You'll see that in this screen, it'll show the status of this survey. If I had scheduled it, and we're within that scheduled window, then I could continue to take this survey. I could start a new sequence, a new form for this survey or formative assessment. Let me show you what this NFL survey looks like. I can click open. And it pulls up all the questions that are related to the survey. So what this is, and I'll walk through this a little bit more later, it's a gallery. Each of the gallery items has a different look and feel based on what kind of question it is. So we'll be looking at that as well. And what's different about this and the form services is anytime I make a change, so let's say I click Seattle Seahawks over here, a little dot scroll on the screen, it's saving as I go along. And you'll see it's been updated over here on the side. So auto saving is kind of where I see apps going, where I see websites going. So this is a good pattern to follow. Okay. All right, let's that's about it. Now let's go through each of these features, and you can ask questions as I go along. I've got the chat window pulled up here on the side, and I'll field those questions as I go along. Let's start from the very beginning. I want to pull up, I have a list here, and I'll paste this into the chat window of the features that I have inside. Oh, it doesn't, let's see, let's erase some of these. And what I want to know, which feature do you want to see first? I'll give it some time. There's a little delay between the live stream and what you see on what you see. So let me give you a chance to chime in. Of these features, which feature do you want to see first? So I'm going to go back to the beginning. And let me give you a chance to answer. A few minutes. While that's going, what I could do for now is go ahead and get started with the first one, navigation menu. If I go to any of these screens, there's this group that I have called group menu. This is one of the, it's an enhanced group. You can get to the enhanced group in File, App Settings, Advanced Settings. If you scroll down, trying the enhanced group control, if you turn that on and you go to controls, you'll be able to see that group control is now available. So that's holding a gallery that I have for my menu. And inside the menu, I have a filter. If I'm the administrator, the person who is running this app, I'm going to show the entire menu. If I'm not the administrator, let me zoom in here. If I'm not the administrator, I can only see the menu items that are less than one, where the ID number is less than 100. And I'll show you what that actually means. I have a menu icon, my hamburger button. I decided not to put animations inside this app. I just wanted it to be kind of simple. And then I have a rectangular background, this blue rectangle that gives it color. And when I click that icon, it changes the width of that rectangle. Okay, going back to the home screen, I want you to see how I've set up this menu. On this toggle, at the start of the app, I am collecting this collection called menu, and it's a table. Now you're wondering, what is that chunk of text? What is that thing? These are actually SVG coordinates for some of the icons that I use inside the app. The icons, these are fabric icons, and these are the exact coordinates as they would appear. So I'm injecting these coordinates into an SVG image, which I'll explain a little bit more later. Each of these menu items has an ID number and a label. So this is the icon that I want for the back button. This is the icon that I want for the home screen and the screen that it's going to go to. This is the screen that the create button goes to, and so on. So that's how I created the menu. Now, how do I actually do it though? I start here. I'm jumping over to a blank app. I typically start this way. I create it as a gallery, and then I shift it over when I'm comfortable with it. So I create my gallery using the table function. I give it an ID number. So the first item, I want it to have, zooming in here, I want it to have a label, an ID number. Call this menu item 1, and I'll show it here. So the table function allows me to see visually how I want this menu to be laid out. And then again, when I'm comfortable with it, I copy the entire thing and then place it on the onStart property of the entire app. So that's the gist of it. And you can duplicate this for as many menu items as you have. We'll go over the SVG stuff a little bit later, so you're not missing that. All right, let's hop over and check out the chat window here. Gilbert is saying multiple galleries under create. Multiple galleries under create. You would like to see how I set up the create screen. Let's check it out. I think, do you mean forms? Do you mean like how I created the forms here? I can show you what's going on in the back end. But before I do that, let's see this. So earlier, I was talking about how I filtered this gallery of the menu. Well, menu item number 100 is this this wrench icon. This wrench icon shows and hides this debugging panel, which I made as an enhanced group. So when I click the wrench, it hides. When I click it again, it can show this debugging panel. And inside this, I have this form that I've hidden. This form and the form behind it are tied to the same data source, quizzes. If I go into the form here in the background, let me jump over to it. You'll see it's also tied to quizzes. And then when I click Show More, this form, Quiz More, is also connected to quizzes. So I've got 3 forms connected to the same data source. So how do I write my data? Well, upon starting this screen on Visible, when I'm creating this, when I'm in this create mode, in other words, when I click that create button, it's setting this variable hide form to true, because I don't want to, this is used for just showing that little text on the screen that says getting things ready. When I'm all done, it turns that variable false, so that getting things ready label goes away. I am getting a set of all of the quizzes in a collection. The reason why I was originally doing that is I was working in Microsoft Excel, and I wanted to auto increment each of the quizzes. Now, what I've realized is I actually don't need those quiz numbers in order. So quiz number 1 might be the NFL quiz that I have. Quiz number 2 might be a quiz that I have on this open house survey. But I realized I didn't actually need them to go in order. So I ended up using the GUID function as an identifier for the new quiz that I make. I put this first form, the one that's hidden behind the scenes, in new form mode, and then I save everything that's inside it to this variable called last submit quiz system. So this form that I've hidden behind the scenes, the reason why I put it behind the scenes is I automatically give it an ID number. So when I'm in new form mode, it uses that new quiz ID number that I had in that on visible property. It automatically determines who is logged in. That's me. It determines when I started and the last modified date time. So I'm basically filling out the system fields. I'm doing that on the back end automatically. So anytime I create a new quiz, it just automatically creates this record. And the most important part is it saves it to a variable, last submit quiz, the system fields. Okay, so that variable is going to be used in the other parts of the app. So these other forms, which are in edit mode, I'm going to go to the item property here. So these other forms are tied to looking up that exact record that I just wrote. So that anytime, so that they're all going to be writing to the same record in the end. And if I go to this bottom form, and I go to the item property, it's the exact same thing. What do I do with that? Well, let me hop over to autosave. I have this button hiding in the background. Anytime it's selected, anytime that it's called, as long as the title of this quiz is not empty, and as long as autosave is on, I made it on by default for everybody, no matter what. So this is, you can consider this true. As long as I'm not in that mode where the form is hidden, where it's saying getting things ready, this button, anytime it's called, is going to be saving all of those updates to that quiz table. So it takes all of the updates from that top form and that bottom form, and it shoves it into the same row that I originally started with. By the way, I want to shout out to Vivek, who actually taught me this, is you can separate, you can write to a single record, in this case, the one that I started, the updates from as many forms as you want. So this top form only has a few fields. This bottom form only has a few fields. This is my way of separating out and creating sections in this field in a form. So I can even add more forms if I wanted to, separated by commas. And as long as they all update different fields, then they could all be recorded to the same record. So neat little trick that I learned from Vivek. Thanks, Vivek. So that's the gist of it. And just one final thing about writing these records is each of these fields, the onChange property is typically selecting that update button. So if I were to select this, it's selecting that button that I have in the background. Because I didn't want to copy that same formula into all of these controls and have them automatically update that record, I just had them select the button. That way, I'm not duplicating that formula. Okay, so that's the gist of this, of how I set up those forms. Okay, let's check out this thing right here. I'm really proud of this control. If you're just joining us right now, let me just remind you of what this looks like. I'm really proud of the way this works. So I might type in, let's start a new quiz here. Maybe I'm doing a quiz on the solar system. And this one's just going to be about the inner planets, the rocky planets. If I wanted to give some metadata to remind myself of what this quiz is, I might say, this is going to be about the solar system, separated by a semicolon, and then rocky planets, semicolon. And then in a few seconds, it creates it as part of this collection. So this experience, you might recognize it from things like YouTube. Every time that you separate things by a semicolon, or every time that you separate some things by commas, the commas will create like a different item inside a collection. I'm going to walk through this step by step now. Going over to this side, I'm going to create a new screen just to keep it separate. So it involves a combo box, and as you might guess, you're going to need to use a collection to make this happen. By default, the combo box has that sample in it. I'm going to erase that sample. I'm going to create a collection. For my purposes, let's do this in the onChange field. And then eventually, I'm going to move this formula somewhere else. So let me zoom in here. Whenever I change this combo box, I want this to happen. So what do I want to happen? I'm going to collect this collection that I'm calling combo box items. And in the combo box items, I'm going to collect combo box 1 dot select search text. I'm going to create a data table just to show you what that looks like on the side. Combo box items. Show what it looks like. You'll see, I accidentally typed something in. Test. Anytime I type something in, it goes into this collection. Let's put in something else. Solar system. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Now let's refine it a little bit further. Going back to the app, you'll notice, before I go back to the other app, you'll notice it was as soon as I typed that letter C, it like put it into this collection right away. That was a little bit too fast for my experience. So I want to put in a delay. Going back to the app, there are some hidden things in here. There's a timer. This timer artificially puts in 2 seconds of wait for me, so 2000 milliseconds. And when the timer ends, I'm going to hop over to the onTimerEnd function. When it ends, that's when it does the saving for me. So what does it do? It's setting that search text to a variable. That way, if this combo box search text were to like get reset or disappear, it's still in that variable, so it's protected. So I'm keeping it there. It also removes anything that is no longer selected inside the combo box. So that's what this formula does. So it's going to be removing that. So let's say maybe I deselected something in the combo box. I don't want it anymore. It'll remove it from the collection. And then this part gets a little bit complicated. Let's read it from the inside out. This variable that has all that search text, I trim it. That means I remove any extra spaces that should not be there, that are extra. And then I split it. The split function turns that string into a table. It turns it into a table. Now I'm splitting it by semicolons. Why do I use semicolons instead of a comma? I separate all of the different things that I type into that box by semicolon in case I want a comma. I like commas inside my choices, just in case. Let's say maybe you have a doctor's name, Dr. Dang, comma, MD. You might want that comma inside one of your choices. That's why I keep that comma there. I'm not a doctor. And then from the table that results, and I'll show this visually in a moment, I'm going to get the ones that don't end up being blank. So if you don't have a choice after the semicolon, it will be blank. I don't want any of those records. And then for each of those, if the result is not already inside that table, inside that collection, then make it happen. And then at the end, save the result back into the connected data source. That was a lot to handle. Let's build it one by one. So going back to the combo box, I'm going to insert a timer. Again, this timer is going to be artificially giving me a 2-second delay on purpose. I'm going to cut that change into the combo box, or into the timer instead. And then let's change a few more things here. Set, I'm going to do exactly what I did in the main app. I'm going to set the result of what I type in to a variable. Just call this temp search text. So whatever I type in, I'll set it to that variable. Okay. Now, just to show you what this looks like, I'm going to insert another data table on the screen. This is just showing you how I'm breaking things up. I'm going to split. First, let's take combobox. Combobox1 dot search text. That's the text that I have. I trim it. This will make sense in a moment. And then I split it wherever there are semicolons. To show that first. Show the result. So if I type a little bit more, Earth, you'll see it starts to appear. Let's put in Venus, Mercury. This is out of order. Mars, Jupiter. Okay. I put in some options. You'll see that it starts to appear here right away. I'm not doing a collection right now. I'm just showing you how the split function works. It looks for all of those semicolons, and then it splits up each of the things that are between the semicolons. So that's what's right here. Okay, so that's the split function. And it's a table now. It's no longer text. It's no longer just a string. I turned that string into a table. Yeah. Carl, I know how you feel about that. Let me do that just for you. Let's put in Pluto, just because we can. And then, let's put in Ceres as well. Just honorable mention. All right. Now I'm going to take that thing and let's go over to this formula. And instead of, I'm going to do a for all now. For all of the things that result if I were to split it up, so I just paste that whole thing there. For all of those things, collect to the combo box, result. Zoom out, I go back here, and oh, there's one more thing I need to do. Let's call this the value column. Oh, actually, I don't think I need that. Okay. Let's go ahead and click this button. In 2 seconds, you'll see it just automatically put that in. Okay, now there's a few more refinements that we need to do. Let's filter this. Filter this where the result is not blank. Okay, that was the first refinement. And then the other refinement is if that result, so whatever comes out of that split, the result is not already in combo box items dot result dot value. If it's not already in there, that's the only time I want it to be written. If it's already in there, I don't want to have a duplicate. And by the way, if you're wondering, this app that I'm making right here with these basic components, I'm giving this to you I'm not ready to ship out the quiz app quite yet, but this, you can have this, so don't worry about that. And then you could always watch the video again to see anything that you missed. Okay, that's the gist of it. And then for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail on like how to get this timer to continually go. Let's hop on to another. Let's go into another feature just to maximize the time that we have. I don't want to spend too much time on any one feature. So that's the basic idea. And then, maybe I should finish out one more thing. This part is important. I set this combo box to the combo box items. And then I do this little hack. I want all of those items to be chosen by default, right? So I go into the default selected items. Normally, you would think, okay, if I want everything selected, I put combo box items here. But they don't appear. Let me show you what I mean. Like, let's say I do solar system again. This time I'll start with Mercury. Let's say I put those in. So it's inside the collection right now, but you'll notice it doesn't appear as being chosen inside the combo box. If I want to do that, if it doesn't work for you, like the way it just happened to work for me right now, then here's what you do to hack it. You filter the combo box items where 1 equals 1. That just means where everything is true. That just gives you everything. It's just a little hack to do the exact same thing. The reason why it might not appear is this collection, I think it's because it doesn't understand that it's the entire table. But that's just a little hack that you can do. Okay, so that's the gist of it. Okay, let's go to another feature. All right, on that list, the gradients. Let's check out the button on the screen. Let me type something in first. Okay. This little button on the screen has some styling to it. It's an image. You're thinking, Brian, what is all of this? What is this scary looking thing inside this image? Let's copy it over to that blank app, and I'll walk through the parts of it. Okay. I'm going to insert a new screen. I'm going to insert an image. Paste it in, and there's a few things that I do need to clean up. Let's just copy the entire control. That way I don't have to clean too many things up. On the screen. Clear the on select, and then in the image, there's a few things to replace here. Let me just do it in Notepad real fast. Fab_2, make it fab_1. Okay, let's bring that back. All right, things should be okay now. What else? Why else is it not working? Let me see. Is it the visible property? Oh, let's make this true. Okay, so that's the image. Now I'm going to break it down into smaller images because there's a lot going on here. the first part of making SVG possible inside PowerApps is to put in what's called a data URI, this thing. At the start of it, I'm telling the image box that the data it's expecting is going to be an image of the SVG type written in XML. So that's just text. Let me copy that over. Okay. The next part is this encode URL function. Encode URL allows you to do exactly that. It turns all of the HTML that might be inside, HTML, XML, it turns all of it into, let's say you have this space character. Well, that space character, let's show you what this looks like. That space character is really $20 when it's encoded. If you have like let's say you have like an underscore inside your HTML. Let me choose a different character. Let's say you have like the this symbol, the less than symbol. It gets encoded into $3C. So I'm using encode URL so that I can keep this looking more or less pretty without all of these turned into symbols. So that's why I'm using encode URL. Okay, the first part of SVG is the SVG tags themselves. I'm going to go into this image, and I'm going to put in those SVG tags. Starts with SVG, and it ends with /SVG. So nothing new here. You may already be familiar with that. Now, in between, I don't just want any SVG. I want it with these dimensions. So you might have a view box where it starts at 0, 0, the top left corner. It has this width, it has this height. It's version 1.1 of SVG, and it refers to the XML language here. I go into the SVG again, and this first part is really where I'm able to achieve the gradients that I want. Break it down. 1 second. Okay, let's go into it part by part. This is my definitions. In between the definitions, I am defining a few things. I am defining a linear gradient, which is this part right here. I'm defining a radial gradient. That means it's, I don't want to say circular. I mean, I want to say it from the inside of a circle, it points outward in lines of a radius. That's how you can think of it. And then I have a definition for drop shadow. So 3 chunks here. If I go into each of the chunks, I don't even have to understand this thing because it's just a copy-paste job. You can just change the things that you need for your gradient. In this particular linear gradient, it's going from one color to another color to a third color. In this case, I could really drop this one if I really wanted to. So a linear gradient goes, how do I best describe it? It's like, pull it up and pull up an example. It goes from one color to another color. It can go from top to bottom. Left to right, linear gradients can also be diagonal. All you have to understand when you're using a gradient like mine um, is what colors do you want? What percent, when do you want the gradient to begin and end? And then here with x2 and y2, what direction do you want it to be? You can fiddle with these numbers and get it to be diagonal. I'm not going to go too much into detail about that. That's more just explore it. So I could even tinker with things over here. Okay, let me go over the next gradient. Actually, let me just show it to you right now. Just maybe I wanted to change the color to teal, and maybe the middle maybe the middle color I want to be sea green, and then maybe the third color, maybe I want it to be white. You can see it change like right away. Maybe I want the x2 and the y2 to be 50. So you tinker with it the way that you want. That's why I'm not going to go too much into detail about it. One more important thing to understand is this ID. This first gradient is, I'm calling it G1, and that's going to become relevant in a moment. The second gradient is this radial gradient. It's called G2, and it's got one color and another color. So let me show you what it looks like. Down here, I've defined a circle. And part of the circle is this fill color. Right now it's G1. If I change it to G2, I love that. I love that look. I like it a lot. It reminds me of Flipgrid. Okay, so that's why I have that radial gradient. You'll see it's one color from the center, and as it goes outward, it changes to that other color. So that's how it's part of this radius, this radial gradient. So you can play with the percentages and the colors. And then this third thing is that drop shadow. The only thing I change here is the mount. So it's the standard deviation number. I'm making it 4% of whatever's smaller, the height or the width. Because this is a circle, height and width are the same. So 4% of that is my preferred drop shadow here. And I could change it to, 1 second. I could change that to smaller number, like maybe I only want 1% drop shadow, 2%, and so on. Whatever I decide, I change it there. Let me zoom out. So that's the set of definitions. And then after the definitions, it's when I put my shapes. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. A vector in this case are these shapes like circles, rectangles, paths, shapes that can be resized without losing any quality. A circle is one kind of shape. Copy it over here. Each of the things that you want inside the SVG can go after the definitions. You'll see that my circle begins to appear here. I could change the shape to a rectangle, in which case it doesn't use CX and CY, and it doesn't have R. Let's see. Oh, I just need to turn this to 0. I turn this to 0? Oh, get rid of the height and width. If you use a rectangle, you will need, I think I have one. I put in some additional code here at the bottom, but it's commented out. So I could put in a rectangle if I really wanted to. And just let me put in this quotation mark. Let's do image width and image height, just to make it a point. So I can stick in a rectangle, and it would take whatever properties I put in here. So I could change the color. Okay, and then the last thing that's part of this is how you put drop shadow inside this shape. So suppose besides the circle, or besides the rectangle, I also have a circle. That circle has this part below fill, that's filter. In filter, I refer to whatever filters I have in my definitions. The filter in this case is that Gaussian blur, that drop shadow. I identified it as ID number F1. Okay. I'm looking in the chat window here. Ahmed is saying, might be some website or online tools to generate the SVG code. Yeah, there's probably a lot out there. The nice thing about PowerApps is there's this huge body of knowledge of how to do these things beyond just the PowerApps documentation. So like things like regex have a ton of documentation, Power Query, all of that. So when you're learning about SVG, there's libraries of this stuff out there. Let me just point to you where I got this one in particular. MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, is in here, is where I got this one in particular. I am thinking this one might be it. Oh, you also need to put the SVG, otherwise you'll get the CSS stuff. This is one of the sites where I learned how to do it. You can just stick this in between your SVG, between your encode URL, turn all of these quotation marks into apostrophe, single quotation marks, and then it should work for you. Just make a point of it. Change those quotation marks to single quotes. Oops. I'm going to do that. Change it to a single quote. Copy it, bring it back into PowerApps. In between these quotation marks. And you'll see it appears right there. So yeah, don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of stuff out there. Okay, let's hop on to another feature. Yeah, Victor, when I say regex, I'm talking about the isMatch function. My big point there was just there's a ton of documentation on some of the things some of the other things that are in PowerApps. All right, let's see what else is on the list. I showed a little bit about gradients, drop shadow. Oh, the back button. Okay, this is not any ordinary back button. This back button, it lets me go through it cycles through a list of things. Okay, if I were to click this, by the way, this is a gallery, and because it's a gallery, it does a few different things. If I'm clicking that wrench icon, which is ID number 100, it will toggle this variable that's called debug true and false. If I am clicking this back arrow, which is ID number -1, it'll do these actions at the top. But for all of the other buttons, like this home button, this create button, this edit button, for everything else, it'll perform these actions. And then, as long as it's not that debug button, it'll go to the screen that it should go to. So let's go into a little bit more about how this back button works. This back button, just to make it a point, let's go to, right now I'm on the create screen. I'm going to go to the edit screen. I'm going to go to the play screen. I'm going to go to the settings screen. I'm going to click the back button. It goes to play, edit, create. It's breadcrumbing as it goes along. I want to give that experience to my users. So what I've done is, when I'm in this mode, I create this mode that I'm calling going back. Why is that important? Well, when I no longer want, when it's in this going back mode, it's determining how many times have you already gone back. If it is, if I'm going back for the very first time, it's going to go to one screen before. You know, I think I'm confusing you because I'm not making it visual. So let me show a table on the screen. This table is going to be, I'm going to set it to this collection. Selected mode. I have a collection called selected mode log. Every time that I go to a screen, it saves a breadcrumb. So when I was on the home, when I was on the home screen, it kept the breadcrumb to that home screen. When I went to the edit screen, it kept the breadcrumb there. I clicked the edit screen a few times. That's why it appeared a few times. And then eventually I clicked play. So I'm breadcrumbing as I go along. Whenever I click that back arrow, it goes back the number of screens that it's, so if I click the back arrow once, it goes back one screen. If I continue to click the back arrow, it adds one to that variable called the iteration variable. It goes back +1, +1, +1. So if I click it 4 times, it'll go 4 screens back. If I click it a 5th time, it goes 5 screens back. Okay. Now, I need to use this variable called going back, because when I'm not going back anymore, I want it to revert to I want it to reset to 0. So it goes to the end of this, to the end of the table. Otherwise, it's going to continue incrementing to the 6th screen, 7th screen, and so on. That's why I use this variable. Now, the variable has 2 parts. It has a Boolean part that goes true, false. So I use the Boolean part to determine, am I in this mode? And then I use the iter column to determine that count. And you see the count up here. The other part of the actions of going back is I determine which screen am I going back to. So here's the collection, that table that you see here in the background. I'm using the last n function. Last n gets me, starting from the bottom, whatever that iteration number is. So if it's number 1, then it goes to the play screen. it retrieves n number of records. If it's 2, it gets both edit and play. If that iteration number is 3, it gets create, edit, and play. And then from that little collection that it gets, I use the first function, because I don't want all 3 of these, or I don't want all 5 of these. I only want the nth number. If you haven't played with first n, last n, first and last, you can do some very creative things with it. Okay, so it's determining what screen or what screen is going to be the selected mode. Okay, so if you're going back, it'll only do those 2 things, and then it hops all the way to the end, and then it goes to that screen. That selected mode dot screen is do you remember when I was creating this menu table? I have a column called screen where I tell it what screen it is. Well, I'm drilling into it here. So that's the back system. I'm going to go ahead and copy to make it inside that new app. I think it's going to be a little bit hard because I had to create a whole bunch of stuff. But if I just create this and I bring it over, I'll let you play around with it and see. I'll let you play around with it and see what you can do with it. So I'll keep this over here. So that's the back system. There were a few other like edge cases that I needed to take care of. Like when I go to the home screen, this is like the very first screen. I did have to duplicate the formula here. Because this is the very first screen, I just manually put in that this is the home screen. And then this select button, this settings button, kind of had to do the same thing, where I manually put things in at the very beginning. But otherwise, for the most part, you could create your own back system. Okay, by the way, if you're wondering, that back system, you could think of the same system being used for undo. I don't know if I don't think I shared my solitaire app, but in my solitaire app, I pretty much use the same idea. I'm logging things as I'm going along, all the steps as I'm playing the game of solitaire. And then whenever I click the undo button in solitaire, it just goes back based on a set of actions. Yeah, so the same concept applies to many different things. Let's check out my list of things that I wanted to show. Autosave. I think I talked about some of that already with the forms. Let me see. There is some other autosaving inside this app. Autosave in the app. If I play a form, like let's say I open up this this NFL form, this NFL survey. I'll walk through a little bit of. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, let me show you what's going on here. So I've got this gallery of all the different forms that I have. Let me expand this so I can see all the controls. This gallery of quizzes got a few different things in it. One of them is this Start New Quiz button. What did I want to show here? Anytime I start a new quiz, I get all of the questions in a collection. And then I actually save a record. I save a session. This is important. For auto-saving, you need to know what you're saving to. So as soon as somebody starts this quiz, I create a record inside a table. So defaults just means a new record inside a table. I just fill out the system fields only. And then all of the other fields, I don't need it yet. But yeah, I just create a session. The system fields include a time when I started it, a last modified date time, what quiz is this, what session is this. And then I think for the session, I created a GUID. And then I wanted the GUID in plain text. That's why I used the text function. Okay, so now I have this record. And I know what session it is from this variable. So when I go to the next screen, this next screen, I know what session it is, and because I know what session it is, I can save to that session again and again. That's going to be used in my lookup. Okay, just real fast before I go to the next screen, you'll see I cut the breadcrumb here. I'm collecting that mode that I'm currently in to that log. Okay, so when I go to, I started a new session. Let me go ahead and start yet another one. Let's play this. And I guess for this one, I don't know if I could put it into the other app because there's a lot of parts. There's a lot of parts to recreate. Okay, so I know what my session is, and I want to tell my user what session they're currently in. So up here at the top of the screen, I've got my session ID, my variable, concatenated with the word session. I have a carriage return, and then I determine from my table of responses, matching the session ID, sort it by the date that it was last modified in descending order. Take the first one. Show me its last modified date time. So the record that's in the table that's most recent will appear in that last saved. Now, because I haven't saved yet, no date appears here, and I could probably use some conditional formatting to show, this has not been saved yet. So if I were to select something, it'll take some time to write, and then it'll put that last modified date time here. Okay, so each of these controls inside this gallery, let me see if I could, the start menu is in my way. Let me do this again. If I were to go into that gallery and I were to go into something like let's go to this radio control. This radio control has an on change property. Any time that I make a change to that radio control, I click this thing called button save. Button save is inside my gallery. As long as autosave is not off. Now, you're wondering, what is this autosave thing? Originally, when I created this app, I wanted to give the user of this app the option of autosaving or not. I changed my mind. I decided I'm just going to keep autosave on all the time. Because after playing with the app a few times and using it, it was a really good experience for me because I enjoyed autosave so much, I just kept it on by default. So you really don't need that unless you want to give the choice. Okay, so as long as autosave is, this is if autosave were off. But because autosave is on, here's what I'm doing. Anytime I make a change, I'm getting all of the answers that have already, getting all the things that have already been responded to. If it is, if the question is, if I don't already have a record for it, create a record. create a record for the question that I'm answering. If the question already exists, in other words, if I've already responded to it, look it up using that selected session ID number and using the respective question ID. So maybe this is question 1, or the radio question is question 2. It'll go to that exact question inside my responses table. It'll give me a new last modified date time. That's important for figuring out when's the last time I saved this. And it'll update the answer that has been given. Now, for this form in particular, depending on the type of question, I save different pieces of information. If it's a short answer, a single line of text, I save what's inside the single line box. If it's multi-line, I save from the multi-line and so on. If it's a single select multiple choice question, I save what is selected inside that radio control, and then so on. Things get more complicated than that. So that's the gist of how I create new records and update existing ones as part of autosave. And then here at the bottom, I put in an error check. I think this is a good practice to get into. Errors function, if you haven't already used it, it creates a table of all the errors that might appear when you're submitting a new record, or when you're patching data, when you're submitting a form. If it is not empty, in other words, if there are errors, I want to put a message on the screen that says, your changes were not saved. Please check your internet connection or try again. Or you could just say, please try again, and make it a warning. So this is just a little pattern that you could get into the habit of doing. You kind of need this with autosave. You need it with autosave, otherwise people won't know that something's has not been autosaved. Okay. Let's see. So I think that's all there is to autosave. Let me peek at the questions here. No questions on autosaving. Geeta has said she's currently working on breadcrumbing as clickable links on every screen. Awesome. I'm glad that you're also doing the same. Let's see. Oh, okay. Here's something important. Because we have this autosave function, or because this is a form, and each of these quizzes is different. Like, not every quiz has text questions, not every quiz has radio questions. Because they're all different, how do you show it? How do you view the quiz? So let me show you how I did that. If I were to click, let's go into this NFL survey again, because it has a few different questions. How do I show this? When I let me go back to that, because there's a button on this that creates things. When I click that Start New button, it is, let's see. When I start a new quiz, it doesn't have any responses, so I don't have to do anything extra. But when I click that button to start and resume a session, here's what I need to do. Determine the session ID number for this previous time that I took that quiz. I clear this collection of temporary questions. I collect all of the questions that are related to that particular quiz form. and I put the information into a collection. I manually did this because there's some columns that I want, some columns that I don't want. So you don't really need to break it out this way. I can just as easily do collect temp questions, filter questions, quiz ID, and so on. I could easily do that. But I wanted very specific columns, so I just broke it out. Okay, here's where I populate the answers that I did that I may have put in. I get all of the responses for this particular session of the form that I completed. For all of the responses in this session ID, I'm going to collect. I'm sorry. Here I'm removing all of the responses. Like if I open up this quiz 2 times, I don't want it to collect the same responses again. So I'm removing any old records that are related to the session. And then I'm just redoing it. I'm getting the answers that somebody has put in, or that I have put in for this particular quiz. These are the columns that I want. Again, probably don't need to break down each of the columns like I did here. I could just stick this entire filter right beside collect, and it would get what I want. Okay. Now, if I were to go to the next screen, I think I put it on the onVisible property. Let's check. I didn't. Oh, I know what it is. I thought I broke it out on the onVisible property. But let's check out this radio control in the items property. For this radio control, how do I show all of these choices? I think I'm going off topic here. I wanted to show how I pull up the answers. So the best one to show for the answers is this gallery of multiple select. So these check marks. I'll get back to the questions in a moment. So in this gallery, I want to know which answers are selected, which answers are not selected. Let me see. How did I do that? I think what I did is in the default property of this checkbox, the way I guess I should go back to how did I actually save my responses? Well, I save my responses like this. I take like Chicago Bears, Cincinnati Bengals, and I separate them by this delimiter. The delimiter that I'm using in my case is, oops, just show you on the screen how I normally save these records. So in this case, in my table where I save responses, it might look like this. The answers that I choose are separated by this delimiter, tilde tilde. So how do I break that out into an answer again? Well, I use the split function. So I split what's in there by the delimiter. Now I put my delimiter inside a label. Not text. I put my delimiter inside a label because it's going to be there anyway. It's going to be used in multiple places. So I didn't want to have to retype it. If I were to split that up, let's do this in a data table. Okay, so that's how I split it up as a table. Now, if a certain text is exactly in, it's in there like Chicago Bears. Chicago Bears is in this table, it's going to return true. If Seattle, I put in Seattle Seahawks, it'll return false because Seattle Seahawks is not in here. So that's how I determine these checkboxes, whether they're true or false. So I'm pulling in whatever responses I've already put in there. Okay, that's the gist of checking for checkboxes. I realized I did not go over the questions. How did I show each of these questions? Before I do that, Victor is asking, this webinar, is it going to be saved on the YouTube channel so you can watch it again? Yeah, you can watch it afterwards as well. So it'll be automatically made public afterwards. Okay, so how do I show these questions? Well, I have this gallery of questions, and it has a few different options here. Let me zoom in. I have an enhanced group for a single line of text, in other words, short answer. I have a group of controls for when a question type requires multiple lines for a paragraph response. I have a group of controls for a radio control for multiple choice questions. I have a group of controls for, which is really just a gallery of checkboxes, when I have a question that takes multiple answers. And then I have a group for a drop-down type of question. And then I have a group of controls for pen input. I did not need to really use a group control here. I like to put things in groups because maybe I have multiple things inside the group and I want to move all of them at the same time. So I make the group move, and then the things inside the group, they respond to the group instead. So I could easily get away with not using the group after all. Now, each of these groups has a visible property that changes. So the group for a single line of text, the group for a single line of text will only be visible when the question type is a single line of text. The group for multiple selection is only visible when the question type is multiple select. So the other benefit of a group is I could change the visibility property of multiple things all at once instead of doing it individually. And then let's go into the answers. For single line and multiple line, the answer that will appear here is whatever answer is this question item and within the session ID. So that's kind of straightforward. It's looking up the answer that has been filled in for this question. For something like a radio control, it's a little bit different. Actually, because a radio control is a single answer, it's still the same. And then for multiple select, that's where you needed to see if I check if this particular word is inside a split of those of the answer. That's how I did it there. But the way that I populated the question choices, like for this radio control, and for this one, the way I created the items for it is I actually also store the options with that delimiter. I split it up for every time that I see that delimiter. In the case of the multiple select, I throw at it two fields, the ID number and the type of question. Just give it some extra information. For the radio control, I think I did something very similar as well. For the items property, I split up the options like Arizona Cardinals, tilde tilde, Atlanta Falcons, tilde tilde. I split it up based on those delimiters. So that's how I get multiple choices here. So that's how you can create, you can store this all as, store all these options in a single line with the delimiter and then break it back up when you need it. Okay, other things that I put inside this app. The accordion for expanding and collapsing. Let me show that. That's this thing right here. This accordion. And I think I have a previous video on this idea already. If I were to select this, it reveals a gallery at the bottom. If I click it again, it hides that. I think some of you might remember this from a video that I had made. The way I created that is I like the checkbox. The cool thing about a checkbox is it has a state, true or false. And because it has a state of true or false when you click it, you can reference it to determine whether something is visible or not. So this gallery of sessions that I have, it will only appear when that checkbox, which is storing that title, so Solar System, Rocket Planets, Mr. Dang's Open House Survey. When I click that and it's on, and I'm in the mode, in this case, I'm using the same screen for the edit mode and the play mode. As long as I'm in this play mode and that checkbox is on, it'll show this gallery. There are two icons. The icon 7 and icon 8. This is the up arrow and the down arrow. When the checkbox is off, it's showing one of these chevrons. When the checkbox is on, it'll show the other chevron. Both of these chevrons are hidden behind this checkbox. So when I click the checkbox, even when it's above the, even when the checkbox is clicked above the icons, you're not really clicking the icon, you're clicking the checkbox. And the checkbox is transparent, so that's how you can still see those icons. Now the accordion is created. It becomes an accordion because the height of this gallery of sessions changes. So if I have, if I expand this open house survey, I haven't taken it yet, so there are no sessions below it. Now, if I have taken it, I want it to give me enough space to show all of these. So I'm using a relative, I'm using some relative positioning and sizing here. I look at all of the items inside the number of sessions. I multiply it by 40. Multiply it by 40 because that's the size of my checkbox at the top. I mean that's the size of my my sessions on the inside. And then that same count of items, I add one to it, and then I multiply it by the template padding. This is what's sandwiching each of those 40 pixels. So this NFL survey, this button here is 40 pixels tall. This text input box, or this text label is 40 pixels tall. Between them is 5 pixels of padding. So if I were to add up the 5 pixels here, the 40 pixels, 5 pixels, 40 pixels, 5 pixels, 40 pixels, and 5 pixels, if I add that up, that gives me the exact sizing that I need to show this gallery. And because this is a flexible height gallery, Gallery Quizzes is able to show all of those items. It's able to expand when this gallery is visible. It's able to hide, or it's able to shrink when I hide this gallery. And then what else is in here? I think that's it for that particular feature. Okay, let me go through my list of things that I meant to show this time. I went through the navigation menu, combo box that collects new entries, gradient drop shadow, back button, autosave, reopening something from autosave, the accordion, and then working with flexible height galleries and auto height labels. Okay. And the accordion, let's see. This is a flexible height gallery. You'll notice when I push Alt, it will go to the way it should look. When I release Alt, it shrinks, and that's because of the template size. By default, the template size that I have is 50 over here. And you'll see the second record is popping up to 50 pixels. And because it's a flexible height gallery, only when I play the app do I see the way it should look. Now, that when you're working with, let me pick out a good example here. Okay, so I have this checkbox. By default, this checkbox doesn't have an auto height property. But what if my quiz title or my formative assessment title is longer than the space that I have here? How do I make this grow? How do I make it taller? If I go into the height property for this, by default, I have it start out at 50 pixels at least. Otherwise, it's going to be labeled 2. Now, label 2 height is this dummy label that I'm just using. Right now, the label 2, oh, I should point this to the correct thing. It should point to checkbox quiz title dot text. So I'm going to make it point to the exact same text. As the checkbox text grows, or as it's longer, this label 2, has auto height on, so it's going to grow. And because the checkbox I made it the same height as the label, it's going to grow as the label grows. So I'm hiding this label. Well, it's not really, it's still visible. I'm just making its color transparent. So it's going to grow and shrink for that. That's one way that you can give auto height to things that don't already traditionally have auto height. Okay, let me see what else. And what I've learned is this auto height, if I go to label 2, The way auto height works is the height that you set for the control is actually the minimum height. So if you want the control to be at least 50 pixels, put 50 here. If you want the height to be at least 0, that's okay because it's a minimum number. You'll see it's still bigger than 0 right now. I like to put the number 0 for the auto height, or for the height of an auto height control. So that's working with auto height galleries. Let's see, what else did I mean to show you today? Okay, we still have some time left, and I think I went through the controls that I wanted to show in this particular live stream. I want to take questions right now. What do you want to see? What do you want me to show you? And what do you want me to put inside this app that I'm going to be sharing with you? What do you want to see? Let me give you some time to, let me give some time for my screen to catch up. As my screen is catching up, what do you want to see in the sample app that I'm sharing? And then let me put some other questions here. What questions do you have for me? What do you want me to show? Let me give you some time to respond, and I'll gladly show it. And while I'm giving you some time, I'm just going to refine some things inside this sample app so that you can see it. Oh, you know what? How did I not show this? There is something that I used in my GIF that I completely forgot to put in my list. Adding options. That's what I meant by adding options. Okay, so if I hop back here and I go to this, I don't know if it'll work right now. Those answer choices. Okay. So I think you may have seen how I put some choices on the screen. Let me pull up a quiz. Let me just make this, let me just show everything here. Let me show this real fast, and then I will go to the questions again. I completely forgot about showing this. Open up the NFL quiz, NFL survey. Okay, so you know how I have these options, and I want to put more options in it? The GIF that you probably saw in the tweet that I sent about this. How do you make it so that you can have a collection, or so that you can have multiple text input fields? And if you were to paste in something from Excel, have it populate some new lines. Okay, this is the one that I think I really want to show. Okay, so here, whenever I add an option, I'm creating a record. This is a multiple choice question. So I give it an ID number. So make it one more than the biggest number. So if I have 20 questions, make this question 21. If I have 21 questions, make this question 22. I make this question relevant, related to the question, or I make this option related to the question I'm answering, and then I start off the option as blank. When I go in to paste in a set of answers, like you probably saw before, here's the actions that are done. The whole ton of text, or a whole ton of functions here. Okay, I determine if there is an enter key. I get whatever's typed into this field. I check if there's a carriage return. And if there is a carriage return, update all of the records below this entry and bump them up based on the number of records that I'm trying to paste in. Let's go ahead and do this from the start. I'm going to create a gallery here. Inside this gallery, I'm going to put in some options. Because I'm putting in options, I want to show a text input field. This text input field, I'm going to need to make it multiple lines, because if I want to paste in a block from Excel, I want it to be able to fit here. And make this template size smaller so that it all fits. And I'm going to put a button here for adding an option. I'm going to use a collection. Select this thing called options. And I'm going to give it an ID number. Get the maximum ID number in options. I'm going to give it a question ID. In this case, we won't need a question ID because we're just doing this one question. Let's give it a label. We'll make the label blank because we'll update it in a moment. In this gallery, I'm going to set it to options. Create a few options. Go ahead and put an X for removing some of these options. Okay. So maybe I might want to remove this one. Okay. Now, how do I get it to... I'm going to go into the onChange property. And I'm going to put in some of that formula. Start by getting whatever is typed in here. Set temp input to whatever is typed into this field. Put in some commenting here. Save get whatever is typed in and set it to a variable. At this point, I'm only going to be referencing the variable. I won't need to reference text input one.text anymore. And then I'm going to, if there is a carriage return, in other words, if character 10, zoom in, if character 10 is in this input, it's smaller so I can see. If it's in here, then do these things. Otherwise, do these other things. Okay, let's figure out if it's not in there. If I don't have a carriage return, let's do the traditional thing. I'm going to patch to my table of options this item. So write to the respective item, and let's update the option, or the label, to temp input. That's what I would normally do. But if it does have a carriage return, let's do some special things. update if this thing, if if the ID number of the particular uh, of the options that are below this amount, if it is less than, uh, let's do some math first. I'm going to put a label here, and I'm going to make it a count of all the carriage returns inside that text input field. So let's split up whatever's typed in text input. Split it up for every carriage return. And count it. So how many carriage returns are in there? It should be 0. Let me see. We need to make it -1 then. Okay. So if I type in Mercury, carriage return, you'll see it counts up 1 because I have 1 carriage return. Venus, I have 2 carriage returns. I have 2 choices here. Oh, actually, I shouldn't -1. I just want this to show me the options. I have 3 options now. The first 2 are Mercury, Venus, and the third one's blank. Okay. Now from that number, I'm going to go back to my function here. If the ID number is greater than this item dot ID plus the amount of records that I'm about to add, I'm about to add this many records. If it's bigger than that, update it. Make its ID number equal to its existing ID number plus that amount. Okay, so I'm shifting all of the records below it relative to what I want to add. Okay, so that's the first part. Let's go ahead and execute it. And then there's one more thing I want to do. Make the default text this item dot table. Okay, so if I were to make this Mercury, it'll update it. Now, I need to do something else. I'm going to be shifting all of these, but I need to collect some new records. If this item dot ID, let me jump back to the app just to show you what's to do next. I'm going to get all of the options that are in it, and I'm going to enumerate them, give them each an ID number. This is going to become important. I'm going to use that temporary ID number to identify it when I create some new records. So I'll make a collection. For everything in this, for everything that is in there, select it to temp strings. I'll give this one an ID number. This temp strings collection is only going to be used just for giving it an ID number. That's it. It's not used for anything else. The ID number is going to be count rows, temp strings, plus 1. X is going to be the result of the split. Okay. So I have them all. What did I do here? for everything in temp strings. Did I already use temp strings? Let me just use a different name. Oh, I haven't used it. Collect to this thing. Oh, I know why it's not working. The rest of this isn't broken. Okay. I'm going to collect it to give them an identifier. Now, for all of those things in the temporary strings, now that they have identifiers, let's put them back into the options table. Collect options. For each of these strings, let's put an ID number, which is now going to be the base ID number, which is this item.id, plus the ID number that I got up here. I should really change this just in case. We'll call it ID underscore. I'm going to give it an ID number, and I'm going to give it that text as it should have. Okay. Comma. And one more thing, if it is the very first one that should be written, if ID is 1, if ID underscore is 1, in other words, if it's the first one, I simply want it to patch that existing record in options. So I'm going to look up that record in options where the ID number equals ID underscore. It's this item dot ID. Okay, lowercase. So get that record and simply just update its text. Otherwise, get a new record. Move this in. And let's fix this up, clean this up a little bit. If this ID number is 1, in other words, if it's the first one, oh, what am I missing here? Up the options. What did I do wrong? Let me just check this. Option dot, oh, label, sorry. And this needs to be label. Okay, let me see. What did I do wrong? Label is text. Well, I'll troubleshoot that in a moment. But the idea is, if it's the first one, just update its existing label. And if it is any of the other options, collect them to this table. we do have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that I get to these questions. Um, Ramon, do you use a variable instead of many lookups? It is something like you do in VB to get data from different tables. I use, I'm not sure where you're asking about lookups. I do use a lot of variables to store lookups, like SQL get. I'm not sure I understand that question. Other questions? How do you handle autoheight in answer text boxes? I think I showed that. I have a video on that one for sure, where I same idea. You take the height of the label that you're hiding behind the text input box that has auto height, and then you make the text input box have the same height as the label. Fabric coordinates. So the fabric icons are available internally. I don't think we have them out there, but if you look at any vector online, like let me show you what I'm talking about here. Give me a vector, set a vector image. SVG. Let me just get a quick SVG image. Let me go to MDN. And get a vector image. That's not going to work. Let me get one with a path. Oops. SVG with a path. So this shape right here, if I like this shape, I could take its coordinates. I mean, I could take this whole thing and shove it into PowerApps. But if I'm going to use this, a lot of the same parts of this, see this from SVG up to path, if I'm going to use that a lot, then I could just store my image as these coordinates and inject it into this other part. That's what I was saying about coordinates. So if you have a fabric icon, or any icon for that matter, you can store its coordinates the same way that I did. How do I find them? This would be an internal tool that I have for getting the fabric icons. I don't think they're externally facing yet, but yeah, any shape that you currently like today, you can get those coordinates. I could take that question offline with you, Anton. Yep. 2 more minutes for questions. And in these two, while I give you some time to ask a question, let me figure out this last part, because I want to ship this out to you so that you have it. Okay. Yeah, while you think of a question, for getting data from files, you use lookup. Yeah, I do use lookup. And when I do the lookup, I don't always give the field name, because it's more flexible for me, at least, to dig into the field name using dots. So for example, I might use like lookup table and then the condition, and I stop there, because I could stick a dot after it anywhere else that I want. Okay, I'm trying to get this thing to work. Other questions? And while you're thinking of your questions, I'm trying to patch this up. Okay. Well, I'll make sure this is working. Uh, this is just me troubleshooting. I'll make sure this is working before I get it back to you. Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, I want to thank everybody for joining me on this live stream. There are a lot of different patterns that I wanted to show you, and I'm hoping that you go back and rewatch it. And I'll be sharing this sample app that has some of these patterns in it, so that you can play around with it, whether it's the SVG, whether it's this method of adding additional options. Um, it will be available to you. So I hope you use some of these patterns in your apps. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and take care. Thank you.